Okay, now we have our player. Let's go into the scripts. So let's go here. The first script we are gonna create, one of the biggest ones that this game will have, and like one of the important ones, is gonna be our player controller. You can call it however you want, but that's just so we know what it is, right? Okay, so we are opening our nice Visual Studio. As we talked before, if you non-commercial, you can use it the community version. This is just like for personal projects, or if you are in a company, then you will have to get a license. But I offer some alternatives before when we talk about things like Visual Studio Code, which is pretty similar and it's a free version. It's an open source one. Okay, we have our code here. And as you can see, Unity has created for us already like a template for our first code. I want to go through this a little bit more detail because I believe like coding is something that maybe not all of you guys are very familiarized, or even if you are and you don't know Unity, it could be a little bit like weird because it has some special things that like are Unity only basically. So it will be nice if we check it out, right? Like if we go one by one and look at it. First of all, I'm gonna explain how like Unity, like how the code here works and how Unity works. It's basically Unity will go into our script and it will run, like it will read the lines that exist in their code. But how does Unity know what to read? Like because I can make it to start like from the bottom and then go up and then go down. So there is like a defined order for things to happen in Unity, and I want to cover that with you guys in here. So first of all, Unity documentation is the best place you can go when you need to find something about Unity that you don't know or you want to know how to use it. It's a huge manual that tells you everything you need to know. Of course, some things like more custom, you will have to do it by yourself or like find it elsewhere. But pretty much all the standard things from Unity are covered in the documentation. So here I am in the order of executions for event functions. This looks a little bit huge and convoluted, but I'm just gonna talk about what like I'm gonna just break it into the basics that what we need to use. But as you can see here, the like Unity runs in a defined structure, right? And there are some events that happens in some points of time. So what we need to know here is like every script, if it has an awake method. So if I go to Unity, I can create here awake, and it will know what I'm talking about. This will be the first method that it will be run if this script exists in my scene, of course. If it exists in my scene, it will go here and it will read whatever I type here. And then if we look at here, there's the onEnable. This might be useful in this course. This is basically when our object gets enabled. Like the awake is just when the object is awakened, but maybe the object is not enabled from the beginning. So then the next call will be onEnable. We don't want to talk about the reset right now. Then the start, that's the one that we're looking here. So the start is called before the first frame update. So whatever we want to initialize, we can add it here in our start. Then we have our physics. We are not going to dive too much into it, just a bit. But basically, the FixUpdate, it's a code, like it's a place that Unity, like as you can see here, there's like an iteration. It means like the awake and all of these ones will run just once, like at the very first time, right? But then the fix update will happen, as the name says, like every fixed frames, once per frame, if the fixed time step is less than the actual frame update time. So basically, an easy way to explain it is every frame in our game, so like a frame could be somehow around like a quarter of a second. In the fix update, we can set up the time, but basically it's fixed. Like it doesn't depend on your machine and your fix or your frame rate, but it will happen consistently. That's why the physics are used there. Then if we move on, we will see, like, don't take care about all of these things. Maybe the on trigger. This is pretty important. It's basically everything that happens with our collisions. It will be tracked here, happening in this same loop. So that's pretty important to notice. Then we can go into our update. Our update is basically it's similar to this fix update, but it's just update. So this will change, like it will happen once per frame, but according to your frame rate, basically. Then we have a later update, which happens after all of this, but we are not gonna use it right now. And then we have here a bunch of other methods that we don't really care. Then we have on application quit that doesn't work on all platforms. Then we have the on disable, which is the opposite of the on enable, which is pretty useful, and the on destroy. So when the object is destroyed, we can still do something with the object, which is pretty cool. Okay, now that we know the structure and the order of operation, we can go back. We can just do a quick, nice test of the ones we are gonna use. So we're gonna say awake, start, update. That's pretty much the most important ones right now. And I'm gonna say here debug.log. So for those ones that know a little bit of programming, you will be a little bit familiar with like printing some messages into your console. For example, every time that you start on a new languages, or like you started with your first time programming, the first thing you do is printing into the console hello world, right? Hello world. That's the most iconic thing, right? Here in Unity, there's a library for the debugging, and there's like the log. There's different types of logs, so log warning or log error, and that will just like I will show you later how the console will display them. But I have my debug.log. I can go here in the start and say just those warning on start function, and then we can go and say this one will be annoying, so I'm just gonna say .log error on update. Okay, so let's go back into our game, and you see here I don't have the console open. It will appear here though, or I can just go ahead and open the console if I go to general and console. For now I'm just gonna yeah, let's open it and put it over here because we don't care, right? So we will see here these three little objects. So the console is very powerful, and it's something that you will be using very often. Here I'm showing, I want to see all my general like log messages, my warning messages, and my error messages, and I can toggle them on and off. Okay, so I'm gonna start. I can clear, I can collapse them. So if I have the same message, for example the update, they will be just shown in the same one, and I just have a counter. I can clear my messages every time that I hit play, which is pretty good, or every time that I build. So I'm gonna show something quick. for you guys to notice, like even though I created this script and I have this, it won't run because it doesn't exist in my scene. That's what we talk about, right? So if I go to my console, there's nothing. So let's put it here. Like my console doesn't have anything because I'm not running this script. If I wanted to run, I have to attach it somewhere in my objects. So I'm just gonna put it into my player controller. Here I have my controller, and now if I hit play, I will start seeing my messages. So if we go here, I just see hello world, then I see on start function. So we went first on our awake, then on the on start, and you see that's a warning, and then my errors is the on update, and you can see that it's happening pretty often. Every frame is happening. If I had this bigger, because if it's too small it's hard to see, I can toggle these ones off or just see these ones. I can, if I don't collapse them, I will just get them all that. I can see here the number. So the console is very, very powerful, and it's good to know. Sometimes make sure that you have the toggle correctly, because you could be missing an error or missing something and think that it's not getting into that place just because you don't have it toggle. Okay, let's hit pause, save here, and we will go back here, and we don't really need any of this, right? So we can get rid of this, and we don't even need the awake right now. Okay, so we know about our script. We need to attach some extra things into our player to be able to work with it. So one first thing we require is a nice component that Unity has, which is the rigid body. 2D, of course, because we are not 2D one. Our rigid body will handle basically our physics of the object. It will handle like gravity and movement and all those kind of things. Right now, our player does have gravity. So if I hit play, you will see that my player will start falling. There you go. And it's going, as I told you, it's going through our platform. If I put it here, our player will fall, and it just collided. You see, it's colliding with our platform, but not with this one because it doesn't have a collider. So let's quickly add into our platform just a box collider and just change that so it's pretty much on ground, and here we want it there, and we want it there. All right, all right, all right. So that looks nice, right? Okay, now that we have that there, I just want to go ahead and open again our player script. 1 second. Okay, so what we want to do is we have, let's hit apply to this guy. There you go. Save. And we are going to open our script. For those who don't know much about programming, I'm gonna try to make my best and go slow and explaining as much as I can how to use, how to program, and how does like the logic goes and things like that. So the first thing we want to do is in this section I will be creating our variables. So every time on Unity or like not in a Unity, like on development, you have to create some variables that then you want to use in your functions. So these are functions or like methods, right, that you can call as we just saw. For example, these ones, because our Unity properties proprietary, they run according to some to the logic that we just saw of the execution order. but we can call our own methods. But we are gonna start first here creating some nice variables. One of the variables that we need is to get access to that rigid body that we created, like the component we added to our player. That rigid body, we need to access it to be able to use it. So we need the first, whenever we are doing a variable, we need the like the level of access, the access level of that variable. We could make it private, or we can make it public. We can go for protected, but right now what we wanna use most of the times will be either private or public. What does this make is that is basically, yeah, the level of access that we have to for that variable. If we don't assign access level to our variable, it will be private by default. This will let us, because as you can see, I have one script here. We will be creating more scripts, and other scripts might wanna be able to access that rigid body, like that variable. So we will need to make it public, so other method, like other classes, this is a class called player controller, can access our variable. So right now I'm gonna make it public so you can see it. So public rigid body 2D, and we're gonna call it just our rigid body. Yeah, rigid body. And every time that you finish a sentence, like a piece of code, you need to finish it with this semicolon. Okay, I just want to show you what happened here in our game. If we let Unity compile, here is what it's doing, that this little gear is compiling. And it now shows me, like, I have my player controller and the RB variable, it's here because it's public. Or, well, this doesn't mean that it's public. Like, I could have it being private and it still show here. This is just because with the inspector I'm able to referentiate variables easier. So you can see here I have non-rigid body. So this is similar to our sprite renderer. The sprite renderer has the sprite variable, which is expecting that sprite. Well, we are expecting here a rigid body. One way to just assign it will be dragging and dropping a rigid body here, right? But we are in the same object. Like, there's no it doesn't make any sense to be dragging and dropping a property when it's on the same game object. So we are just gonna get rid of that property. It's gonna make it private, which will also remove it from our inspector. We won't be able to see it unless we add a property to it, but in this case we don't need it. And we need to initialize that variable to be able to use it. How we're gonna do it is we're gonna go into our start function. So as soon as the start function is called, like before the first frame, we are gonna call, and we will gonna say RB, which is our variable. We are gonna assign to it, so the equal means whatever, like the variable on the left will be assigned with the value on the right, and it needs to be the same type. So I'm gonna use something from Unity, which is called get component. So this basically is getting a component from this game object, from the game object which this component, which is the player controller, is attached to. So I will say get component, and it's asking me which type of component do you want to get. I want to get a rigid body 2D, and I need to just do this because it's a function, and it will be assigned to my rigid body. So just for the sake of showing you guys how that works, we can do it public so you just see it. So let it run. And it's compiling, finish. So here, let's say we don't have it, right? So we don't have the rigid body. Once we play, like hit play, it will find my player script, and it will go right away and look for that rigid body 2D in the same object, and it will assign it. So now it's assigned. This is in code, and this will happen every time that I start the game, and it will call the start method. Once I stop my game, that reference will be gone. This is good because I don't want to keep that reference here or having to be dragging it. It's just automatically going to be referenced. Another variable that we want to create, we don't really need this anymore to be public. We will like to have our animator, right? And we're going to call it an anim. You can call it as you like. Anim. Of course, there is some like variable best practice or like methodologies that you can use, but I will probably add another post into my website talking about like which one they exist and which one I like the most. But basically it's like either you assign a variable, like for example you say rigid and then body and then it's like capital B, so you start with lowercase and then capital like that, or other types, but I'm not gonna dive in to that right now. Okay, for the anim we're gonna do exactly the same. Get component, animator, and we just do that. So now we have access to those two things, right? Now what we want to do is we need our player to move, right? We want our player to start like moving to one side and the other. And one way to do that is to use our keyboard to move around. So I'm gonna start just creating here. Unity has some properties to like read the input from your keyboard. And I need to put it inside of the update because I needed to the Unity to like keep reading that code, expecting an input from the user. So I'm gonna say if, I'm just gonna create an if statement, input. So this is the class that I need to use, which is letting me like get the input from to the computer, like from the computer basically. Just get key down. It means when I press a key down. If I just say get key, it will be whenever, if it's down or up. And if it's get key up, it will be when it's up. But I just need get key down, then the key code, and I'm going to say dot a. And I can just go ahead and say debug dot log a key of keyboard was pressed. Just let's give it a try. It's compiling. Down here you will see the console, and I'm going to press the A key now, and there we go. A key of keyboard was pressed. If I put this here so you guys can see it better, every time that I press it, I'm getting it 2, 3. If I uncollapse, there you go. I'm pressing it, pressing it, pressing it. Okay, so that's one way of doing it, right? I can just go and get my input from that key, but that might not be the best way to do it. Like, this is a great code to use, and we will probably be using it for different things, but Unity has something also that help us with these kind of situations, and it's amazing. Like, it's something pretty cool to have. And it's, if we go to edit and we go to our project settings, and if we go to input, we have that input that is trying to like look for things, and we can select the horizontal. So the horizontal axis will tell us, okay, this will happen, like this will be called, like no, Unity will know the horizontal axis was used whenever the negative button, which is left arrow basically, or the positive button, which was the right button, or the alternative button will be A or D, right? And we have like the dead point, like this is when I'm clicking it, the gravity, like there's a bunch of things that we can use, but basically this also matches to like a joystick, so it is way more powerful and it will track way more input for the same thing we were doing. So we can go into our script and say, instead of just tracking for A and then for D and then saying, oh, I also want to track my left arrow and my right arrow if I want to walk with those ones, we can just say create a float, right? And we will call the movement on X, the X axis, right? Or like horizontal input is equal to input dot get axis instead of the key, and we can say horizontal. So the only thing that is a little bit annoying is that you have to put the string name of the axis that you are looking, and it has to match exactly the other one. This is just because you can create your custom one. So I'm gonna create it as horizontal. I'm gonna save it there, and what I'm going to do is that like this movement, whatever I track here, will let me know like if I'm hitting A or D or like left or right, and it will move. That will be like the movement that I have on my X axis, which is pretty good, right? But since that will only track between 0 and 1, we can just check it out here. Log movement is plus horizontal input, right? Let it compile, and we go into our console. We can clear it if we want. Here if I click, so now it's 0. Let's collapse it. If I hit left, you see it's going up to -1. If I hit right, it's going up to 1. So that has a little bit of trouble because we don't want our player just moving like by 1, because like our like physics won't let us move that few. Like we require a little bit more of speed for our player. So what we're gonna do is we can manage the speed of our player. So here we can say these are just like components of the player controller class. Now we say variables that control our player. So we can create a float speed, right? And just so we can change it from the inspector, show serialize field. Okay, so what we are doing is we are adding some variables that we are gonna be able to modify here. So our speed doesn't require to be public right now, maybe. Like for example, if we're playing on a game where your player will step like on like a muddy place or something like that, and you want to slow down the player, you will have this like on public, or maybe you have a function that changes the speed of your player so it moves slowly, or if you're poison or something like that. And what we want to do instead of like debugging this is we're gonna say that our horizontal input is going to be equal, right, to there's two ways. So on programming, there's two ways to do this. We wanna multiply the value of this variable of what we just gathered by our speed. So we can say horizontal multiplied by speed, right? Or there's some like typing that we can change, and you just gotta make sure that you have the right version of your typing that so it will match. But basically this one will always work. So instead of doing that way, you will just say horizontal input multiplied equal speed. What this is doing exactly the same as we had before. It's multiplying the variable by speed and saving it into that variable. All right. So now that we have that, what we want to do is do our rigid body dot velocity. So basically we are getting here, this is a method that the rigid body has. So you can see vector2 rigid body. So what it's doing is there's two types of methods. One is to the get and the other is the set. I can get the velocity, so the linear velocity of my rigid body, or I can set, if I add the equal here, the velocity of my rigid body. As you can see here, it gives us the tip that is a vector2. So if I want to assign the velocity of this rigid body, I need to assign it with a variable that is a vector2 variable, because it's expecting the x and the y values. So I will say new vector2, my horizontal input, right? And I want to keep the same velocity on y. So rb dot velocity dot y. This is one way of doing it. The other way would have been I create just an empty, like I just store my rigid body velocity in a variable. I change the x position and then I assign it to this one. But here I'm doing it just one line, and you most of the times will like to keep things in just one line. I'm just gonna go ahead here and say keep it the other way around, just for you guys. If you come later, it will be easier to understand what's going on. Here I just assigned the velocity of my little player. Okay, so why don't we just go ahead and give it a try. I am going to set the speed of my player, just to start, to 6. Right? I have like Unity start like giving you some warnings. It's just like, hey, you should do this or that. For example, here it's saying like the player controller dot speed is never assigned and will always have its default value to 0, which is not true because I have my inspector here to assign it. That's why these ones are just like that. Okay, so let's hit play and we will be able to see our player that it's walking. Like if I hit right or left, the guy will move, and if I hit A or D, the guy will still move. If I change my speed here to 10, for example, my player now goes way faster. If I leave it to 0, then my player won't be able to move because it's just 1. It actually kind of be moving, but it's too low. Or well, actually it's not moving because I'm multiplying by 0. This will be like the movement by 1. That's why I like the 6. I think 6 is good enough, and our player is moving, right? Okay, now we have our player moving. That's amazing, right? What we want to do now is we don't want to get our update too convoluted. So all of this that was written here, we are gonna create a new function. As I told you, we can have functions that we can call to run code. And similar to what I did like with the parenting, that I just encapsulate something here so I'm able to move it and things like that, I can sort of do something similar with coding. I will create a private, which if, and remember, so when I create a function, I need to also do access level. So for example, private, or if I leave it without of it, it will be the default. Then I need to tell what's the type of variable that I will return. In for example, these two methods, they don't return anything. So if I call them, they won't return anything, and that's the void. So if I say void, I won't return anything, and then it's just the name of my method. So I want to call it update controls. So this will just keep tracking of the controls that I change. I will put all of this here. If I leave it like that, the code will not run. So if we check it out, if I hit play, and if I use the arrows or the A and D, my player won't move. That's because you see I'm using them and it's not moving. That's because like that method that I created is my method and is not being called by Unity at any point. So that's why I need Unity to say, okay, you update controls, I need to call that function. The parenthesis is if I need to receive a variable. And then here, that's why I have the same parenthesis if I need to send a variable. In this case, we don't need any variables. We are just like putting that code there so it looks a little bit cleaner. Okay, so now we are going to do something pretty fun. And is we're gonna check if our rigid body dot velocity and the velocity on the x-axis, if it was greater than 0. If the velocity is greater than 0, it means we are moving to the right, right? Sorry, 0. It means we are moving to the right. And if we say then else, if, because if not, then we will be tracking the position 0 and we don't want that, like velocity equals to 0. We need to say our velocity is less than 0. And now we can track when our player is going right or left. Then the other thing we want to, like what we want to do with this, it's that we want to change the orientation of our player. There's two things we could do here. One is just flip our player, like our sprite, like this. Oh, just compiling. We could go ahead and just flip our sprite, but as you can see, there's a problem there. You see, like the collider is not perfectly aligned, and it will look like now when it's right here, both fits are a bit inside of the collider. Here, one fit gets outside. One way to fix that is just changing this to -1, and there you go. Like my player is like changing directions, but is not affected by the sprite. So if we go ahead and we say that, how do we do that? Like, how do we access this? Because we don't have a variable for it, we didn't create it. That's because Unity, because it's a game object, it has already granted access to that component. And we just need to say transform. We will be using this a lot. And we can access, we have here 3 variables, as you can see, the position, rotation, and the scale. So we want to go and say the local scale, we don't want the global scale, to be changed to new, and it will give us, like, it needs to be a vector 3 because it's expecting x, y, and z. So we say if it's to the right, we just go 1, and it's telling me you need float variables. So 1f, and 1f. right? And if we are going to the left, we will be saying -1. Now, if we go into our game and we let it compile, hit save, and we hit play, we will see our player now facing the right direction every time that we go to the right direction. So that's nice. And the collider is still inside, like it's perfect. Okay, now our player looks like he's always on the idle state. So why don't we just go and hook up the animations so our player is actually moving as well, because that will be cool to have, right? Like at least because we are about to finish today's session, it will be cool to see our player all actually walking. So we are going to first commit our changes. Just let's go into our scripts. So we're gonna add the scripts folder with the scripts, and we will say add player controller with basic movement. And we are going to say here add collider to floating platform and add player controller to player prefab here. And you will see that the material is the only one that I haven't used, and I will use it soon. Sample scene, add player rigid body. Okay, and let's push that. And okay, we are back. We want to go into our code, and the same we did here. We most likely want another function because the animations will probably be called pretty often. So we are going to say update animator. You notice that Unity is complaining like, hey, that function doesn't exist. Unity has a great thing here, which is like a suggestion on how to fix those errors. And here is suggesting me, hey, do you want me to create that method that is called update animator? I can just go ahead and click create it. He will go and create for me that method. He's creating it private. I can just remove that. It's exactly the same. And I don't need this exception. Okay, so I have my update animator, and what I want to do in my update animator is to update the speed. So like my I want the animator to know about the speed, like the velocity of my player. How is it moving? For that, we are going to our animator, and in our animator there's here layers and parameters. In our parameters section, we can add a float, and we are going to call it speed with capital PS, sorry. And what we are doing here is from idle, we want to make a transition to the walk animation, right? And we want to say that it happens whenever the speed is greater than 0. So whenever our rigid body tracks that the speed of our player became greater than 0, we are gonna go there. There's another thing pretty important here, and is the has exit time. This means that because that could happen like at one point of the animation happening, like you saw that the animation will like run, right? That could happen. Let me show you. So the animation will be running here on the animator, you see? It could happen at any given point of time. Like maybe the speed will change at the middle or at the beginning or something. If we have this checked, then our animator will wait until this is finished to move to the next one. If we remove it, it will just cut it and move to the next one. I'm just gonna leave it so you guys see it, but we need to hook up that speed. So let's go back here, and in order for us to say update our animator, right, we are going to say anim, which is our animator variable. We are going to say set float. We need to give the ID or the string of the variable speed, right? And then we are going to give the value. If we give the straight ahead, like the rb dot velocity dot x, this is gonna cause a problem because this will give positive and negative velocity, as we just saw here. When we are going left, it's gonna be x. We don't want that. We don't want the velocity. We just want the speed, like how fast is he moving. So we basically need the absolute value of this. Unity has this nice library which is called mathf, which comes with a lot of mathematical like operations for us to use, which the first one it comes to be the absolute value of. This will basically just return the value without the negative sign. So if it's going to the right by 5 of speed, it will return 5. If it's going to the left on -5 of speed, like on -5 on velocity, it will just return 5. So it will always be positive, and our animator will always show us the right, like the right speed. So let's go ahead and try it out. I'm going to move this animator here so just we can see it. So our speed is there. You see that? So as you can see, now our player is walking, and now it's stuck there because we don't have a way to come back. But if you saw there, it waited until I finish here to be able to move to our walk. If we remove this, it will be able to just cut it in the middle and go to the next part, or like however we set our transitions here. Okay, but we need to add another little piece here, and it's what happens when we how do we go back to the idle. Like if we are not moving anymore, we need to be able to go back. So we can make a transition here, and we will say it will go back whenever the speed is less than 0.1, right? That basically means whenever the speed goes to 0, we want him to go into idle mode. And in the same case, we don't want him to keep like walking until it finishes the animation and then go to idle, because it will look weird. So we're just gonna remove that, and we're gonna hit play, and we will see our player in idle mode. Here is in idle, and as soon as I walk, he will start walking. You will notice there's a bit of delay to start walking, and that is just because what I was telling you about the transition. So if I go to this transition, it's telling me that the transition duration, like how long it takes from here to start the other animation, is basically a 1 frame. So I would like to set this to 0, and now every time that I just pressed, it will right away start like walking, like right in the second. And for the stop, it's not that bad, like it takes a little bit to come back, it's fine. So okay, now we have our player and he is walking, and that's our player moving there. I can zoom in a little bit if you guys want to see the player, and here looks a little bit nicer. That's our player moving. So if you feel like maybe it's not matching too much the movement and the speed, you can go ahead and tweak here the speed. Here maybe it has to be a little bit slower. so the player, like, it looks more according to that walking animation, or you would like to have that speed back to 6, but if you wanted the animation to look faster, you will have to just change it here on the walk animation and change the sample so it walks faster. But essentially, that's how we are gonna hook up all of our other animations. So in the next episode, we will be covering how to set it up to actually like jump, and how to attack, and how to start like actually doing those, because here we are only like, that's just an animation. We had to also make it so it actually moved, so we need to create a function to actually jump, track the jump, and whenever we do something, track our attack. But for now, that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed it and you learn pretty much how to set up your scene. You can start creating a much bigger scenario with a lot of platforms and things and more detail, and you have a player that is able to walk around. Um, just before we finish, I will like commit this for you guys. So on the repo, if you go and don't like pull the repo, you can get from here and start like playing around, like looking at this, and maybe you can start like giving it a chance on how you will implement the jump, for example, and then you can check it out on the next episode how I gonna do it. It's just one way of doing it. There's a lot of ways to do, for example, jumping. That's one of the different type of things that you can do in a different manner. But for now, that's pretty much it. I will, as always, upload our session into my video, so into my channel. So if you go to my channel, you will be able to see the previous sessions, and I will be uploading this one as well. If you want to follow it along, like the video and post it every time, so you can like really do everything at the same time. And on the next class, we will be covering all the other aspects of the game to actually get to that point. Probably next class we will be moving a little bit faster. We will be covering way more things on the player, how to like collide and all of those things. For now, thank you so much, guys, and everything you need, just let me know and I will be able to help you out. Have a wonderful night. See you on the next session.